Every place has a story. Some stories refuse to stay buried. 15 kilometers off the coast of Nagasaki, in the cold gray waters of the East China Sea, there is a shape on the horizon that does not look like an island. It looks like a warship. A vessel half sunk, frozen mid-voyage, its decks crowded with broken towers. Sailors who pass it at dusk say the silhouette seems to move against the current, as if it is still trying to reach a port that no longer exists. Its real name is Hashima. But for over a century, the people of Nagasaki have called it Gunkanjima, Battleship Island. And tonight we are going to step aboard. Hashima is a small place, barely 16 acres of rock, smaller than many city blocks. Yet at its peak, in 1959, more than 5,000 people lived crammed onto this single reef. It was, by population density, the most crowded place on Earth. More crowded than Tokyo. More crowded than Manhattan, 5,000 souls, stacked vertically in concrete apartment blocks that rose 9-10 stories from the sea, walled in by a seawall that hid them from the world outside. They were not there by choice. They were there because, deep beneath the island, beneath the seafloor itself, there was coal. The Mitsubishi Corporation bought Hashima in 1890. They sank shafts that descended more than 600 meters below sea level. They built Japan's first large reinforced concrete building here in 1916, because wood could not survive the typhoons that battered the rock each summer. And then they built more and more: apartment blocks, a school, a hospital, a shrine, a cinema, a rooftop garden, because there was no soil anywhere else. A pachinko parlor, a brothel, an entire city balanced on a tomb. At its peak, Hashima Island held 5,000 people on 16 acres of rock. The most crowded place that has ever existed on Earth. Families slept in single rooms the size of a closet. Children played on rooftops because there was no ground left to play on. The air smelled of coal dust and salt. And below them, 600 meters under the sea, their fathers carved tunnels into the dark. The miners called it the prison without bars. Because you could see the coast of Japan from the seawall. You could see it. You just could not reach it. To understand why Hashima haunts the Japanese memory, you have to understand what happened here during the war. In the 1940s, as Japan's war effort consumed every available worker, Mitsubishi needed bodies. They brought them in by the boatload. Korean laborers, Chinese prisoners of war, conscripted men who had been told they were going to work for the empire and were instead delivered to this concrete island and lowered into shafts so hot the rock itself burned the skin. The records are incomplete, deliberately so. But survivors who spoke decades later described the conditions in voices that trembled. The tunnels flooded constantly. Cave-ins were routine. Gas explosions killed men in groups. The death rate among forced laborers is estimated, conservatively, in the hundreds. Some historians believe it was far higher. Those who tried to escape swam 15 kilometers through currents that could drag a boat under. Almost none of them made it. The bodies that washed ashore on the mainland were sometimes the only proof that certain men had ever existed. When the war ended, the dying did not. The mines kept running. The town kept growing. Children were born on Hashima who would not see grass or trees until they were nearly teenagers. They knew the world only as concrete corridors, salt wind, and the deep tremor of the mine beneath their feet. And then, in 1974, it ended. All of it. In 43 days. On January 15, 1974, Mitsubishi announced the closure of the Hashima mine. The world had moved on from coal to oil. 5,000 people were given 6 weeks to abandon their homes. By April, the island was empty. They left everything behind. Half-eaten meals on tables, children's bicycles propped against walls, calendars still turned to the wrong month, television sets still plugged into the sockets, a pair of shoes by the door, as if the owner had only stepped out for a moment and would return any second. Hashima was not evacuated. Hashima was abandoned mid-breath. For the next 35 years, no one was allowed to set foot on the island. The Japanese government declared it off-limits, citing the danger of collapsing structures. Typhoons hammered the seawall, salt ate through the rebar. The concrete towers, once homes to thousands, began to crumble inward floor by floor. But the ban lasted longer than crumbling concrete required. Some say the real reason was darker, that the records of who had died in those tunnels and how had never been properly closed, that families of forced laborers were still demanding answers, that to open Hashima was to open something the government did not want opened. When tourists were finally permitted to visit in 2009, they were restricted to a single concrete walkway, a few hundred meters. The rest of the island, they were told, was unsafe. The tour guides will tell you about the architecture, about Mitsubishi, about the engineering marvel of the seawall. They will smile politely. They will not tell you about the footsteps. Visitors have reported, repeatedly, the sound of footsteps in the upper floors of buildings that have no functional staircases. They have reported voices speaking Japanese and voices speaking Korean, drifting from windows where no person could possibly stand. A photographer in 2013 captured what appeared to be a figure in a window on the 7th floor of Building 65. The building's 7th floor had collapsed inward years before. There was no floor for the figure to stand on. A documentary crew filming in 2015 had to stop production for a day after one of their sound engineers, alone in the lower level of the old school, recorded what he described as a child whispering directly into his ear. He took off the headphones. The whisper continued. He left the island that afternoon and refused to return. The fishermen of Nomozaki, the closest village on the mainland, will not pass Hashima after dark. They say the island makes a sound when the tide turns, not the sound of waves, the sound of voices. A low murmuring as if a crowd of thousands is still speaking inside those concrete walls, still calling out for husbands who never returned from the shafts, still asking questions in languages the empire tried to forget. One old fisherman put it this way. He said, "The island remembers the names, every single one, and on certain nights when the wind is right, it tries to say them out loud." In 2015, UNESCO declared Hashima a World Heritage Site, a monument to Japan's Industrial Revolution. The decision sparked outrage, particularly in South Korea, where the descendants of forced laborers demanded that the full history be acknowledged. Japan agreed, then quietly equivocated. The plaque that now stands on the island mentions the coal. It mentions the engineering. It does not by name mention the dead. Perhaps that is why they linger. Perhaps a place that is denied its full story will tell it anyway, in whispers, in footsteps, in figures glimpsed at impossible windows. Perhaps the concrete itself has absorbed too much, and now releases it slowly, the way a sponge releases salt water, the way memory releases grief. Hashima Island is still standing, for now. Each typhoon takes another piece. Engineers estimate that within a few decades the towers will collapse entirely, and the island will return to what it was before the coal was found. Bare rock. Empty sea. But until that day, it waits. 16 acres of silence. 5,000 absences. A battleship that never sailed, anchored just close enough to the coast that you can see it on clear afternoons from the hills of Nagasaki. If you have ever felt watched in a room you knew was empty, if you have ever heard your name in a voice that should not have known it, leave in the comments below. The Archivist reads them all, and some of you, I think, already know what it means to listen to a place that refuses to stay quiet. Sleep well, if you can.